So I'd like to invite for our last session four, I could say probably sort of vooraanstaan. What's the English word for vooraanstaan? Prominent landscape architects and urbanists in the Netherlands are working around this topic. Marie-Laure Hoedemakers, firstly landscape architect, part of Baljon landscape architects, specializes in realistic visionary solutions, yet visionary, for climate change, for energy adaptation and urban and rural landscapes. But we'll talk about urban landscapes today. Tomas Degenaar from BplusB Urbanism and Landscape Architecture, with a specific focus on planning and design, and looking at how we can just, let's say, combine spatial quality and clarity. We'll talk about a bit of that more in your work. And then Shelley Long, Madelon Pluis, can I ask you to join us? Shelley Long is landscape architect, Canadian born, but worked for Westside for quite a long time. Born, she just told me, at the start of the first project at Westside, and still running the same project, which is a nice and interesting note. Madelon is the newest star, I would say, at Westside. You're probably the newest addition, or have you been there for a little while? Oh, 4 years now. Okay, right. Well, and you're not. But still, great to have you here from a design perspective and stratification, which we'll talk about. I'm going to have this run this as a sort of a talk show kind of thing, ask some different questions, but you're very welcome to put your hand up and ask them something as well, so we can keep this a bit more informal, but also more dynamic. I want to start by asking, I'll start with you, Thomas. Ask you that if we look at the discussion we've had and look at your own work, what can you say are the, let's say, the kind of novel new approaches or almost principles, ideas which are coming forward in your work, in which this idea of forest urbanism is starting to sort of take root and be grounded?
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do that by looking at some examples first. And I would say that a lot of novelty or new ideas come from frustration. This is a project that definitely comes from frustration. We had at this moment, I think, 3 or 4 Italian colleagues, and every time they went back home or they went to Rome, with family or friends, they were frustrated with their own city. There's no trees in the city. We are so spoiled in Holland, actually, and in Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, we have an average of 1 tree per 2 inhabitants, which is among the highest numbers of trees in European capitals. In Rome, it's 1 in every 10 inhabitants. So they made a proposal, my colleagues, and we're presenting it actually, we have presented it to the city as well, to different bodies, also environmental bodies within the city. But it came as our own initiative, this project. So we started it and we said, let's give every inhabitant in Rome their own tree, which means about 3 million trees to be planted. Which sounds like a nice idea, and I think, as landscape architects, we all like planting trees. But then again, in Rome, where moving around in the city, the mobility is highly individual. It ranks very low on the levels of public transport in the city. It's not that easy because every tree you plant means a piece of road has to go basically. And everyone loves it until you want to remove a parking spot and then hell breaks loose. So yeah, that's what's the idea? 3 million trees for this city. Well, how do we do that? We said, let's focus first on these main roads that lead into Rome. There's no space there, there's hardly any parking there. And try to fill up those spaces, those avenues leading into the city with trees and transforming them. With doing that, we change the perspective a little bit of the commuters coming into the city, also for the people living along it. So they think they're highly polluted streets. So hopefully the streets and the climate will positively change. And then later on, when that has landed in the city, then actually start to fill in all the other streets and thus completing the 3 million. So there's some examples, and we just use very simple, diagrams, images like these to show the city what it could be. And in a city like Rome, this was quite a revolution, so to say. But I think for all of us, also students and professionals here, it's really to think like, yeah, this is what we do here. But so also not taking for granted what we do in Holland and trying to apply to other territories is actually a way of being novel by just applying it to another location. So you see also the changes, and you would ask anyone, maybe not the one who really loves this parking spot, that this is definitely improving for the city, of course, with all its benefits, which are, as described, scientifically studied. Shall I go to next project? Yeah. Let's go on. This is actually a project in the city of Hilversum, and it just shows our attitude towards trees as a design tool as well. Of course, as landscape architects, we love trees, but it's a shared love for trees and respect for trees also, as a signal of time, of deep time, long time, of time that exceeds our own existence, which really can make a project also elevated to another level, so to say. In this project, which is the Nike European headquarters in Hilversum, we had limited means to try to create a new square in the heart of this kind of cluttered space. And we said we use trees here only 3 different design ways, so to say. So it's signature trees, it's clusters or bouquets of trees of different species, and the forest edge as a way basically to hide ugly buildings. But by using the trees in these 3 different design techniques, so to say, we created a new urban landscape. There's actually a big skate park, which is part of the commission, that almost gives you the feeling perhaps that the trees were there before the skate park. And they're all planted and built at the same time. All trees come from the tree nurseries. Thankfully, in Holland, we have tree nurseries that sell very big trees. But also, yeah, I think also convincing clients, and in this project it worked, to invest in big trees. Like some of the trees you see here, like a big pine tree in the back, they cost up to 15,000 or 20,000 euros. So it's a big investment for clients, which clients are often not willing to make. Bringing them to a nursery, showing them what's being sold, showing the impact of what they could buy, they could be proud of as a personal project, really helped. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Before we get to practicalities, you just made that you said something. This is a new urban landscape. So you're saying that the notion of working with trees and in a public space has generated a new kind of space.
Yeah.
And how are we seeing that? What, in terms of are we looking at what seems to be an existing forest which has been made into a public space? That's the technique.
Yeah, the existing forest in this space is actually surrounding the plot, so it's not on the plot itself. We kind of allow the trees or planted to walk from the forest into this space to make also the connection to the bigger landscape which is surrounding this.
Yeah. Interesting. If any of you would like to respond to that, you just put your hand.
Another project which takes trees as the base for urban development is Buiten. We're not unique in this project. There's actually a beautiful project in Eindhoven, Bosnijken, Carlos and Blans, for example, which also does that. Takes existing trees as a starting point. Also, this project, of course, show that. This is an outlay, an urban sprawl outlay in a mediocre-sized town in Netherlands. 2,000 houses were to be built. And we said here that we just keep all existing tree structures. That's really the basis. So all trees, the lanes, the houtwallen, the shrubbery, so to say, along agricultural plots, and create enclaves of about 30 to 250 houses at once, to create pockets within this landscape, and always leaving the trees and planting new trees also to create this framework. And you can see in the model how that was planned. If we're looking at it now, it's being built, it's continuously being built, it's a very slow process. We see that these enclaves are being built. We always left space between the green structure and the ensembles of housing in order also to allow a couple of farms to coexist with this neighborhood on a very different scale than it was before. And we use also new planting also to create a smaller scale landscape to go against the effects of ruilverkaveling, the land consolidation that has happened there. And what happens here is that there's quite a nice balance between the public, or the housing, the existing tree lanes, and it really dictates, so to say, the urban pattern. Lewis,
Let me jump over this one.
Yeah, sure.
This is a project that I think Marie-Laure started off with, which actually responds to that last project, the single scale.
Yeah.
We can go to that one,
Yeah.
and jump through to that image.
Yeah, it's that one, yes. Thank you. Yeah, René asked us to show what is new, but maybe it's not always about being new, and sometimes it's about embracing what is old. It's what you are doing here. This is Enka terrain in Ede. Ede is one of the largest villages in the Netherlands, and it's this location is very close to the station. You see that in this first image. You see where the train could go into the factory. This is a former factory site that has been transformed into a housing area. And one of the things we very often deal with in urban transformations is either polluted soil or in the lower Netherlands that we have sites where we need to raise the soil to build houses. And that makes it very hard to build onto what is there already. So this is also a project where this image is the image of the process of cleaning the soil. And you see how intrusive that is. And here, the areas that are circled white are the trees that we managed to keep. And we had to fight hard for it, because this bit here is, I can't seem to get the point where here it is. This bit here is on the edge, and therefore the soil was only very lightly polluted. So therefore they let us keep it. But even this little circle over there, it's only one tree, but it makes a huge impact on the site. So it starts with embracing what is there already. You cannot always do it, but if you can, it has a huge impact. This is one oak that was kept, and it's now part of the neighborhood. And it is very much enjoyed by the children in the site. And this is the little forest on the edge, where we very precisely looked at which trees were already there, where we made plans for how the housing was allowed to be incorporated into the forest, but where we also added new trees to the forest, because of course you also have to make sure that there is continuation, because you ask, when is it a forest? I think it is a forest when it has future, so that means you also have to add new trees. And you also asked us to point out what goes wrong in reality. Here we added new trees, and there was a contract for them to get water in the first 3 years, but apparently it's very hard to water trees that are between existing trees. So the new trees in the tree-lined streets, they were watered, but the trees that were in between the existing trees just did not get watered, and most of them died. So we have to try and start again and have to find methods for that. So the practice is sometimes it's easy in theory and very hard in reality. And the next thing to do, of course, is to build onto that quality. So what we did in some of the new streets is to make sure that there is a verge that is wide enough to plant trees that can also have a forest quality to it. And also that is hard, because now they're working on a new energy system, and therefore they dig up everything again. So this notion of continuity is one of our everyday struggles. But we do it, of course. And then at the moment we also fight with solar panels, and so we make more and more asymmetric tree profiles where we create room for solar panels and trees at the same time.
But now you're jumping into the next thing. Let's go back to the good things first.
Good things. Yes. Shall I hand it back to you? Right.
No, let's continue on with that.
Let's continue on. Okay.
We'll get back to it.
Okay, good. Then a very small project, but I think to us it's of great importance, because this is, you see the big white area in this forest. This is Heerlijke. It's a polder that has largely been built. And in the 70s, there was also recreational forest made in Heerhugowaard. It was one of my first projects that we worked on at Kous en Brands. We made a little plan for the transformation of that forest. But recently, through Buitenadvies, which is an ecological office, they asked us to work with them on the redevelopment of that greenhouse site, because they had managed to convince the municipality that it should become part of the forest, and that it should be allowed to, somehow this is not working, so that we could make new forest. I think you can hear me anyway, I'm trying to be loud. Together with 40 houses. So, and Buiting is almost religious in how they approach forest. So this is all with indigenous species and very much connected to the clay soil that the rest of the forest is on as well. And we detailed it carefully, and it was the basis for a change of systemics plan, so it had to be allowed. But what is nice about it is that it's seen as a potential, as an example for a larger forest development in that area, because it's now there's awareness about that we need forests and that we need special housing environments. And here there is a real genuine interest in seeing if we can keep using this concept also at other farms that might stop, because with the current energy crisis in the not so condensed greenhouse areas, there is farmers that struggle, and that might stop. Shall I keep going?
No, just I have a question to this one. Just no, actually, good. Because otherwise, not too much.
No, I just wanted to make a quick comment on these two projects, because I look at it from research that I've done, and I really recognize the patterns that you see in Flanders, because the first project I imagined was a kind of sandy heathland before, and then it was big pine trees, which are very nice to urbanize, to live inside, and this has a clayish soil. I'm very curious to see how you would deal with housing in that sense. In a sense, it sounds a bit contradictory that you use a similar pattern for the houses. I just want to make a comment that in terms of the process of how you read the project of the forest that was there and how it transforms, for me it really reads as a kind of a process of the relation between both that continues, so, based on soil. So it was very clear, very nice.
Well, that's a good compliment, but could we ask that as a question? What is it? Did you look and look about you? Did you look at these aspects like soil and the relationship between the natural and the urban system, or is that not does that not matter?
No, of course it matters. It matters largely, folks, already how you deal with water, because water is essential in this proposal. You see that water is also essential in the plan. So the clay soil the water doesn't infiltrate as easily. So here we have a central area, a central sort of wet area where the site drains towards. All the paving is open, so there's and so it all goes to a central area that also connects to the path system. So there's a route. There's a route along here that also carries you into the forest. Same here, same here. So this is sort of the common. You could make it. You could say it's a common woodland. So this is the common ground, whereas the plots on the side are the larger plots, and they are private plots. This is actually it was compulsory. The municipality didn't let us only make houses in a direct forest setting. So these are houses, these are two under one roof that are directly into the forest, but the ones on the edge, they have their private plot, and that was not debatable. So it was we tried to do it in a different way, but so here in the contracts they will have to plant trees, and of course you never know if they will really do it.
Okay, so there's a relationship, a strong relationship between understanding the water system and using the soil or let's call it subsoil of the ground conditions.
Yeah, and the trees, that we propose to plant the trees in different sizes so that you already create an age difference within the forest. And the nice thing about the clay soil is that it's fast. So here, because there's no forest there at all because it's greenhouses, but it's expected to be fast, and that's nice about the Ede side where you can keep the existing trees because on the sand it's slow. And trees are slow anyway, but on the clay they are relatively fast.
Okay, nice. Then we can go back to then we'll jump across a bit. Can you go to your last project then? Because then we're talking about sort of nitty-gritty water, soil things. The car park project. No, sorry, not the car park project. Sorry, the project with the forest next to them.
Yeah.
Is there some connections, new things happening there about thinking about
because previously
the system?
This one.
Yes.
Yes, previously I said like we'd like to plant big trees, but in this case, I think allow trees to compete. Maybe you try to give trees the best growth circumstances you can give. In soil testing, you try to understand the water system. But at the same time, I always remember a quote by Simon Klinger, who is a famous tree expert, or let's say forest expert in the Holland. He says, trees do not want to die. You know, it's like it's not that they want to die. You have to kill them almost actively in order to die, to make them die. So what we did here is actually to plant trees in a new build project from the smallest, cheapest size available, which is literally like you can plant this for basically for maybe €1,000 or something like that. Which the developers really much loved, of course, because it was rather cheap. But we wanted to allow time to grow, to let this forest grow inside this building block, and we pushed the architects and developers to remove the parking from below the garden onto the side, to create a forest garden, which was actually going to be monitored, that was the idea, by Nature Education Netherlands, IAVN, I think it's called. They would monitor it for us as a prototype to see how it grows. And also the families who would move here with small children would see this forest grow during their time. So it's allowing also, trees to do their thing almost, and to allow time into your project, which then hopefully makes even a small garden affordable.
So are both these projects novel typologies? Do you know of other examples that look and work and act like these projects, these two?
Yeah, I think one example I really love is by the Danish modernist architect, landscape architect Sørensen in Aarhus. It was there's the university campus there, and all the oaks you see there were actually planted with acorns. So they just put the acorn into the not a Dutch acorn, an acorn into the ground. And now, 50 years later, these are magnificent, beautiful oaks. So they really also,
So that's the planting principle.
Yeah.
But this particular sort of combination of typology and morphology, the forest situation, both of them, that's did you use reference projects to discuss these?
yeah, we do, but I would say that, and I think also later that comes in the presentation again, that almost every vendor at the moment in architecture, landscape architecture, also uses forest as a way to give a project status almost. So it's like we see a lot. We see eco forest, we see picking forest, food forest in projects a lot these days. But to really see them establish and grow, there are some examples from the past indeed. It's definitely not completely novel, but trying to find new ways to actually make it happen. That perhaps is.
Yeah, I don't think it's novel at all. I think it's been done before. We just have to remember that what is novel is that our clients have interest in it at the moment. So we really have to dig up all these principles that were there already also in Almere. There's many examples. Some are more successful than others, and they're very interesting projects to learn from, and for us as a profession to dig up again and to apply again, especially the successful ones, of course. But what is novel is the interest in the rest of society, and especially on the client side, in forest and in trees, not necessarily in users. That's one of the topics we will come to as well.
Yes. I would suggest, though, I've never seen a plan like this before. I'm looking at Wim, who probably knows all the different versions in Belgium.
There are.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
But we realized that's something else.
Something really
And the way, because it's a question, and of course you will safeguard it, but the way that it then how it will be realized is a big question, of course, because there's a lot of density of houses, and so, but realized projects like this, not so many.
Okay, let's go to West 8. Shelley, can I ask you to pass this just up
I
through?
can make a good segue here from Tomas' project about the kind of approach of managed succession, which is in one of our kind of typical portfolio projects that we just skip over.
Oh, no, you did skip forward. Sorry, we're just
Going around. Oh, it's at the end, probably.
Sorry, it's at the end, yeah.
It's paced. So Schiphol, which many all of you know, is the international airport in the Netherlands. And I want to tell the story of Schiphol today because, as René mentioned, I was born in the year that West 8 won this tender. And I have inherited this story and this project, and it's typical of our approach as a larger office. We have really long-term clients who are able to kind of monitor our projects and continue to deliver on them for a really long time. And so I'm 30 years old this year, so the Schiphol Road is also 30 years old. And when you think of Schiphol, when you think of airports, you think of, well, what are their places, right? They kind of developed in the boom of in 60s and 70s, international travel. But when we look at Schiphol, it's actually much more of a city. I'm gonna bring up on my slides. Okay, we'll stay on this one.
I put them in my position.
There's more?
No, I put them all in, maybe.
I'm just seeing the slower picture. But in the ninth, what you have to know about Schiphol is that the landscape, again, we start with the soil, actually used to be a lake, so it's at the bottom of the Haarlemmermeer, which means that the soil quality there is very, very poor. It was filled in, and it was all constructed fill. And there on top, we decided to build an airport. And from that airport, it has no identity. So when West 8 first started, I was approached with the assignment to create a landscape strategy for Schiphol. It was a place that was a permanent construction place. So there was always people digging up wires. There was always people, demolishing things, and it was complete disaster. Asphalt, concrete everywhere. And the idea was, can we take all of this kind of temporariness and the quality of the soil and build a landscape structure that's based on temporality and doesn't require, very important point, a permit to cut down any trees. And with this approach, in partnership with the National Forestry Research Institute at the time, we found that there was one specific tree that the Baljon pubescens, which is not a native tree, but it is a tree that does incredibly well in a very windy environment, in a pioneer environment, on poor soil, and it needs to be planted really close to one another. And so we developed what we call the nursery approach, or the managed succession approach, they call it today, I think, in modern forestry terms, where we planted these trees very close together. So that in the beginning years, that they are planted 1 meter on center maximum, and then they're culled back and cut back in the remaining years so that they have less competition, and the ones that are bigger had the chance to grow larger. And the idea was to fly this grove, which was complemented by a clover-rich understory layer to help repair the soil and make it more nutrient-rich for the trees, everywhere in Schiphol where you did not have a building. And in this method, they were able to plant 1 million trees in a very, very short amount of time for very little money. And in the places, as Schiphol developed over time, we have actually now kind of 5 centers, because there's 68,000 people who work at Schiphol and 25 million passengers who come through every year. As the kind of city, urbanity has come to Schiphol, we are able to introduce more species like a London plane, like an elm tree, in places that have more sense of permanence. And so then the forest gets replaced with a longer term tree. And new building places, again, get planted with seedlings, and it's a continuing cycle of succession.
Just to say, is this a novel urban forest, or is it
I-
a novel forest?
I
or is
think
it
that
forest
this is
that-
a novel urban forest. When we were reflecting on your question for the symposium today, René, I thought this is an amazing example actually of a novel landscape that became urban over time and has transformed itself and kind of maintained itself. And we have these beautiful examples that I see here on the right-hand side. Good applications or perfect applications of the skippable growth, because this is something that any contractor can do. They can go to the nursery, they can buy a seedling, and they can specify a pollinator-friendly, clover-rich understory. It's not something that asks for a lot of maintenance, and it's continually changing. Of course, we have requirements that we want them to be planted in a grove and solitary trees, for example.
So is it smart? Sorry, is an urban forest then a smart and successful planting strategy? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I think what I'm saying is the approach has to be based on the site, and it also has to help create an identity for the place, because if we had some kind of generic approach, it's not necessarily beneficial to people either. As a client, we also gave them a new green identity, and I don't think there's any other airport in the world that I can think of, or I think of the airport and I think that's a forest. I think that's a place, and it has an identity, and I can recognize it in a magazine that's not based on the style of the architecture. And so I think it was an amazing project to progress the Dutch landscape, let's say, in a very novel foresty way.
Question.
No, it's not a question, but a comment. To be honest, when I go to Schiphol, I never really see the forest. I don't feel the forest at all, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know. I'm really
Doubting if it's really so obvious that Schiphol is a forest as a user. I don't know what other people think. If you go there, do you feel the forest? I'm really wondering. I think it depends on how you travel.
I think it depends how you travel. If you're on the train, you don't go outdoors.
Yes, that's not for sure.
But when you come from the highway, we have our most beautiful examples of actually this forest. And it also, I think, has to do with kind of the education and the marketing, because as I said,
I would say it isn't a forest. It's a lot of trees, and it's an interesting project. It is a lot of trees, but it isn't a forest. So the birch is standing alone with much of other birches, but it belongs to the Betelgeuse system that should be starting living there through time. So then you need undergrowth, you need this.
But the proposal is it's not possible. Of course.
And there was another parameter I forgot to mention, which is, of course, being an airport, we can't have birds and we can't attract birds. And so one of the results of the research with the Dutch Forestry Institute was what tree does not attract a large bird or swarms of birds. And so it's a very unique ecology. And this is where I think it's an interesting debate.
There's no problem with that, but
what is a
that's
forest?
another thing.
And if we say that this is not a forest, does it therefore have no value to us as a society or as a landscape
No, that's
architect?
not what I'm saying.
Yeah, but it's a question I have for you.
It's an interesting typology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Stefan raises question. It was a forest indeed, but I think if we judge it like that, then I think 95% of what we saw this afternoon can be wiped out as not being a forest. But by naming it some things, for instance, a forest, we might as well also risk losing real forests. So maybe because we have only started to work with this, as Marie-Laure said, there are many examples of decades ago, but since this is becoming more and more interesting, maybe you should develop also a better typology and naming of things, what we mean. So we are also maybe developing a new language with it. Like, I don't know, but I see what you mean, and I also see what you mean.
Three members for typology and
I would suggest that woodland is perhaps a woodland type, so it's perhaps a more potentially valuable, because we don't fall into our sort of more sort of positions on things, whereas woodland perhaps is more interesting, and there's a long variety of traditional woodland in all kinds of cultural landscapes.
Now, tree meadows is a very interesting, important typology in landscape architecture.
Tree meadows.
Yes, and this is a kind of stretched out tree meadow. And so if we are going to mix up these typologies by name, then we don't know what we are doing with our history. So in Spain, the dehesa is a very important ecological system, which is different from the original complete forest. It's one of the most beautiful landscapes that dehesa has in Spain, but I won't mix it up with a complete Quercus betuletum.
But the question is then still whether it's attempting or trying to be a tree meadow and following these natural orders, or it's actually generating or becoming something else. And then the question is what is that ecosystem? Let's go on, because this is a very interesting session. We should continue on in the bar. Reda.
Rio,
Up to
whatever
you.
you
Up to you.
and then we go totally back. And then we
But keep it about open partially. We don't need to know a lot about the project. If you
a little bit scared now, but I'll try.
we do need something good.
We talked already a little bit about Madrid. We won in 2005 a competition, Madrid Rio. The project is now realized. What's really special about this project is before they put out a competition, the mayor of the city asked the inhabitants if they want to pay more tax every year to realize a really big park instead of the infrastructure. So that was the start of the competition Rio in Madrid. So what you see is that Madrid Rio, as I was told a couple of minutes ago in our project, that there is the forest and the landscape on this side. There is this major infrastructure in between the city, and the ideas from the project is to connect those two together by a landscape park. So the infrastructure was placed under the ground, and now there is a park that connects the two city parts together. So all different inhabitants meet in a central place in the middle of Madrid. It's also the place where Madrid was born. You see here the park with the castle. This is where Madrid was born long ago. It's along the canal where the fruits were tilled and the hunting area from the king. And what you see is that it's an ecological spine between those two landscapes. And what is really special about this project is we also do it in the Netherlands, the Groene Loper project, for example, in Maastricht. But that's a really typical project, West Asia approach, where you build housing and development, you get money from it, and then you can build the Groene Loper. This is so special because the inhabitants pay more taxes for 30 years to pay this project. And they voted for it. So that makes this project really special. You see that there is along 6 kilometer boulevard from pine trees. We did a really study about how they will grow in the soil because there is this infrastructure underneath. So this tree is a typical tree in Madrid. You see it a lot of in the gardens from people there. It grows really good on rocks, and you can see the tunnel as a rock. So that's why we chose those trees. They also have a sculptural image. So the side of the canal is not a hard border, but the trees will bend over in the future. They will bend over also the waterfront. And this is really the place where so the inhabitants from Madrid will meet. It's now a place where the the women dress nicely and parade around in the city center of Madrid.
Madelon, how is it just I'm looking at Margarita, how is this, can you reflect on some of the hybridizations that Margarita proposed at the end of her presentation? Are they, or perhaps Margarita could you, so if we know the project, if we're talking about forest urbanism or urban forestation, what kinds of, what were you doing here in that regard? What are the learnings from that? Is it the hybridizations of the social and the social system and the green system, for instance?
Okay, I can answer on your behalf. So an important point of the competition is that it didn't have to be a park. There were other entries that said we're going to turn the riverfront into housing and we're going to densify and we're going to make social housing, for example. And we won the competition because we said it's going to be 100% green space that will give back to the city. And I think another point that Margarita made was about the slow mobility, the ability to gain space back from the car and introduce more slow mobility. This was literally, if we go back to the side of the section, the burial of the highway was the main impetus for the competition. So either we could build housing on it or we could build something else on top of it. And we replaced this with a slow promenade, as you can see, really wide, giving the pedestrian the dignity to be along the waterfront. And there were sections, but what we're not as involved with, because it's directly to the center of historical Madrid, is the flooding aspect. Margarita mentioned is not as prominent in this project because it's about multi-layered space where people can recreate and use it, and it's not, again, it's not like an isolated. I come from Canada, so I know a lot of forests. I know, just to kind of qualify that, these are not the kind of forests that we see that people leave the city to recreate in, but again, we have this kind of democratic approach for the waterfront. Margarita mentioned in her lecture.
Success.
Yeah, just to say that this is really a successful project in a context that is really harsh on nature. like compact city as Madrid or Rome are fighting trees out. And I think that in that sense, I see it as a transitional educational tool to have artificial planted forms that approach citizens to nature. And then maybe in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, maybe floodability is acceptable again, or there's but I think it's successful anyway, so it's really successful.
So you would see a second generation next?
It's a dense city, it's dynamics, natural dynamics in cities are not easy, but this idea of pushing cars away, making streets more permeable, perhaps even collecting rainwater from buildings and having dynamics, water dynamics in the city might be a second generation that might help.
Yeah, I just had a small question, but it's a very technical one. Because, of course, we're in this kind of trying to strive towards less cars, etc. So was there ever a scenario in which the tunnel becomes not a car tunnel? Or it's because it's designed, okay, we put a highway underground, but of course, maybe we are thinking ahead further.
It was not an option to put out the car totally, because this is one of the main roads in Madrid. That is also a little bit of problem when they realize this project, you can imagine. You can do this project in 20 years and you do it in phases like they did in Maastricht. For 20 years, the city was a mess, but you could drive with your car through the city still. And here they realized it in 5 years, but you couldn't come anywhere with your car. So the whole city was total chaos. So there was a trigger for a lot of inhabitants. So when the project leader was, for example, traveling from the airport to the project, he couldn't say that he was from West 8 and working on this project one, because then he would never arrive on the project site.
Yeah, I am from the Madrid region myself. And yeah, this project was a hard one to build, so on that I agree. And yeah, it drew a lot of criticism too. I also wanted to ask in this section specifically, why did you choose these group lines? Because I get that it was because of some picturesque appeal and to make it look more, I don't know, Mediterranean forest-like, or why exactly a choice of this species and this shape of the tree? Thank you.
I know a little about it because back in the days when it was realized I wasn't working at my state, but the project leader told me that it was because of the soil. So the tunnel is from concrete, and those pines are really growing good on rocks as a soil. So that's why they chose this tree for the boulevard.
It also relates back to the identity that you were talking about. It's that we don't just pick an appropriate tree, but we pick one that gives you the sense of place, the sense of identity, and that's what this also does with that area.
Just quickly, because I want to go to the last section.
I can add something to that because really they were searching, I think, for a picturesque image, this image of tortured trees. And by coincidence, I know the tree nursery where those trees come from. Or in reality, it wasn't a tree nursery, but a leftover property of a cloister where monks had put trees in the wrong way and very bad treated. So that's why they have this image, which was luckily because the tree nursery hit West Acht or Rio, and they said, okay, but we like these picturesque trees. And the tree nursery said, okay, finally I'm rid of these very bad trees, and they sold them. So that is
I don't
nice
think it
coincidence.
were 8,000, right?
No.
Yeah, there are 8,000 of those trees, but the idea started.
Inside information. Interesting how this happens.
Yeah, but it's a very well-known fact in Madrid that actually the owner of these trees was so glad to finally get rid of them. And the thing is that in 2020 we got this like very heavy snowfall in Madrid, and of course because these trains are crooked, most of them are like broken or like they are even more crooked than they were, or like so in that sense I think that it was sort of a pity not to like also think a little bit of what could have happened, because many people, I had a professor in Madrid that was the curator of the Royal Catholic Museum, and that was the thing that he kept saying: someday we're going to get this big snowstorm or a very big windstorm, and all of these trees are going to cause real trouble.
That's a great bridge to our last topic, which is the glitches and the hiccups and the problems that I come across with this kind of, let's call it speeding up and accelerated kind of transitions in which forest urbanism and urban forestry is one. Let's jump back to Marie-Laure. Can you show, I think you have a nice example.
I think we should do the Heide de Rechter first.
Okay, happy to do that. Let's go right back to the beginning. Thomas, can you share some anecdotes and impossibilities, or let's call them sort of challenges and dilemmas, wicked problems?
So yeah, when I was thinking about and preparing this session, I was thinking like we love trees, but that's definitely not shared. Like we see that also in the project. So I just took some screenshots of like the Heide de Rechter, which is now called differently. It's called I don't know. It's kind of, if you're not from Holland, it's a television program. If you have issues with your neighbor, just call this television program and they will solve it for you. They will give a binding legal advice. Actually, it's like Judge Judy, something like that, but then a bit more provincial here, I would say. And 99% almost of the cases are about gardens, garden fences, trees, these kind of things. And within the program like it, it's kind of a secret love of mine, I think, to watch this. But you see the extremes between people who love trees, who say like, there was a man who said like, if you take down the tree, just kill me, he said. And the other neighbors who hate the trees so much. And that comes kind of clear here. And we see that also in project. We do a lot of projects, of course, with participation. People, they say like, oh no, trees great, we want a green neighborhood. until the practicalities come in place and the parking lot has to be removed because a tree has to be planted there. And then I would say almost everyone chooses for their parking spot for the practicality of having that in front of the door. So it's not that obvious that trees are being planted on a large scale in cities. And legislation is one thing, like for example in Amsterdam, you cannot remove a tree who is planted, only if it's planted closer than 50 centimeters from the fence. I've got two trees in my garden to my neighbors, they're all planted 60 centimeters. So I cannot do anything about it, I also don't want to do anything about it, they're very big. But in most of Dutch towns, it's 2 meters, and 2 meters seems not a lot, but at the same time, almost no one is going to invest in a tree to plant in the middle of their garden. And within the 2 meter limit from your fence, you're not allowed to plant a garden. In many situations in Holland. So in some of the projects, we try to convince also the municipalities to give away free trees, because people just don't buy trees in general. Maybe that little apple tree, but definitely not in their gardens. So maybe also free trees as subsidies is a way to get more trees and more fights also. More public television. But yeah, it's definitely a struggle.
And the next one?
The next one. Yeah, this is maybe some of you seen it, but this is not to talk about any project or any landscape architect in general, but this was a satirical post a few weeks ago on Instagram, which talked about a project which could have been our project, because there's a lot of, as I said, a lot of projects which are very small scale projects, and we call them forests. And this also has this duality, I think, between using the word forest, which is the word that we gave to the forest doesn't the name itself, by using or abusing it. It's very usable in the sense that forest, later we come to that, holds a very mystic meaning still. It's a very powerful word, in which a lot of tenders these days are won. You look at Amsterdam, most of the tenders that are won these days by developers and architects, the landscape architects, include picking. There's batteries out there. They include picking forest, food forest, all these kind of things. So it's a powerful image, but at the same time, we have to realize maybe be very specific and being secure with our semantics and the words that we use. Or what is a forest and what is a woodland, or is it a forest garden? Is that less than a forest? Well, the word forest is so powerful that it brings us also in these day and age into the attention, because maybe without that word, the project wouldn't have been won. So it's maybe the landscape architects that made the project win. But at the same time, yeah, is it a forest? So these are good discussions.
Yeah, that's Madelon.
So I can really understand that it is a powerful vehicle, as a horse of Troy, to get your project. But I wonder, does also the concept really help to do fundamentally different things? Because a lot of projects we see, of course, trees are always important in landscape art, as we are here. So that's not on the discussion. But my question is, the concept of forest, is it helpful to do things in a different way? Or is it more like a kind of furnishing or a way to get our projects?
I think it depends on which parties you manage to get on board. Sometimes there's not a yes or a no answer, I think, to this, because but sometimes you can get certain parties on board of your project if you make it a forest or you name it a forest, like VN that you just mentioned. And yes, then sometimes you can do different things than if you just do it by yourself as a landscape architect. So the possibilities that the word sometimes brings can also result in, can also create different results, but it's no guarantee. So there's not a black and white yes or no answer. But also sometimes you can get stars being involved, or so it depends.
Yes. Yeah. Can you in the meantime go to your slide?
Well, I think, you hear me? I think there is a lot. I should be careful not using those words for greenwashing. I think there are so many of those pictures that we have seen recently that, well, it is really hard to get the results they are showing. And in my opinion, I think it is really important that we make robust green systems in cities that really deserve the word forest. Yeah, I think so, and we should not be too positive about that. Because it's really fragile, like you showed, existing forest and even if it would have worked, your plan, who is the owner? Who is going to maintain it? That's also something that's really very fragile. So, in my opinion, we should, as landscape architects, professionals, we should make robust systems that really make possible to have forests in cities.
Yeah, and I think especially on roofs, because I think we should really stress the importance of trees with their feet in the ground, because they're, first of all, they're public. You see in many cities, and I think Amsterdam leads, is a leading party in that now. In every tender there is this checklist for nature inclusiveness, and it's you can score a lot of points for green facades and green roofs, and it's almost an excuse in a city that becomes denser and denser not to have a green image anyway, and therefore not create enough public green spaces. I know it's a different topic, but it is. But it's very close to my heart because it's something that we see happen a lot. We see tenders where it starts with a picture of Velde Park and Rembrandtpark Park, and there are parks that are completely full. In the Velde Park, not a single person can enter in summer anymore. So it's just not sufficient to say this development is going to be near the Velde Park. And therefore make a green roof. And so it's this necessity of whether it's a tree or a forest or an avenue, but to have that in the public domain, I think is extremely important.
Okay, but I'm not disagreeing with it. But what do you say then? For the same way, in the same breath, we are still saying that we should keep cities compact and not spread urbanization. It's bad. So if we're going to grow, we need 1 million houses. There's no way we can build robust green structures with the trees on the ground by keeping to this policy. What do we do? Do we spread? Do we go out?
We can show the project René. That's about combining the water problem with a green structure.
But is it like it's still like a fundamental answer to the question? What do we think about enlarging cities so that we can build robust green spaces? Are you happy to say, Sylvia, are you happy to advise that we double the size of our cities, because that's what we'll need to do if we want to build robust green structures with trees in the ground, and to build 1 million houses? Is that what you'll say to the Tweede Kamer? You're going there next weekend.
Yeah, no, it is a problem, of course, and it is about space and how we use spaces. But me as being a landscape architect, I feel a responsibility to be honest about what we are doing. And that's the first one. And the second is that we have really to make people aware that we should, if we want to have sustainable cities in the future, that we need more space for green systems and for green infrastructure. And that if there are big developments, that we feel the responsibility to make this really into interesting, ecological, interesting systems. And that's what your project shows. That they all are going with either problems in infrastructure, like water, etc., or new infrastructure, and that we feel the responsibility to use that money and that energy and the time to build really robust systems instead of.
Great, I can't disagree with you, but it's a very political.
On pictures.
It's a good, yes, it's a very good answer, I agree, but I still think we don't, show the real, let's say, depict or qualify what that actually means, because we can't densify cities and make robust green structures. That's a wicked problem. That just doesn't work. Could we?
Yeah, well, I think it's very contextual, so it's very difficult to talk in general terms about the expense of the territory. In Flanders, I can refer to that, at least what I know, it's all about finding a balance again between intensifying green and intensifying urban. Because it's spread out, so we try to intensify urban, and with that we can open up. So there's also a whole big notion of de-sealing, the de-sealing operation that is going on. And so to refine this balance, to de-seal where possible, and then to intensify where also possible in terms of urban, in terms of housing, or in terms of the city. But it's a very contextual question, of course. But for me, I've got with this soil. I'm an architect, but I think if we can open up the soil, we de-seal and we allow the soil to breathe. I mean, isn't the soil the main system that connects all the trees with the rhizoome system on the right? I think that's a great start. And then I like the fundamental questions that you asked for the forestry, because I think it starts from really opening the soil. Then maybe we can start to build a fundamental ecosystem from it. Don't remember that etymologically forest meant outside, right? It was it's like fuera or fora, etc. It was the thing that was outside of the city. So if you want to include it in the city, you really fundamentally have to rethink it and maybe go probably also a bit back to what forest really is. So.
In the city, it is also very busy in the ground.
Yep.
So that's another dilemma that we're facing.
But it's also about intensifying what you do where.
Yeah.
I just want to go, let's go to this because I'm looking at the time as well, and I want to pitch what's going on. Marie-Laure.
Yeah, I have one. René asked us also to show where it goes wrong. And this is not about forests, this is simply about trees. This, show one more picture. This is in Zutphen along the IJssel. We made a new harbor in an industrial zone that is now being transformed into a mixed housing zone. And in the zone between these new apartments and the harbor, there is a road, but there is also a promenade-like area, and the intention was to make a canopy like this, so that you could look underneath to the harbor. And with the drawing, with the trees on it, the apartments were sold. But there is somebody with a legal background in the apartment, and despite the fact that it was in the folder when he bought the house, he fought the large trees that were planted, and he managed to convince the mayor, or not the mayor, the wethouder, I don't know what it is in English, to replace the large trees that were already planted by these stumpy little things that we have here, so we will never have a canopy. Then they were going to cut down those trees, so we managed to save them, so they got dug out and they will be used elsewhere. But so this is to support what Thomas was already saying about that we see a need for trees, but not everybody likes them, especially not if they're in front of their door.
It was institutionally supported, right? Yeah. I mean, you have a policy and an ambition, then you need to kind of go for it. This is a political problem, right?
It's a political problem, yes. And this is somebody who got scared of somebody who has a legal background, and then this is the result.
There are cases in Belgium where they're like vandalism that go into nature areas to ring the trees, to cut them. And, or they tried it in this project I showed in the 4 hectare. They were also ready to do it, and they had to call the police. So the neighborhood was kind of on the eye. So it's quite aggressive.
Yeah, we see new strategies now. For example, the municipality of Amersfoort now does a lot of participation where they ask us to propose, for example, 3 species of trees for a certain street, and then the public can choose, and then once chosen, that's it. And so there are ways of dealing with it, and but it's we see the dilemma.
Sorry, I'm going to wrap up by handing it to both of you. And could you finish off with maybe a reflection on, perhaps also with this project right out, about the things that you're running into, dilemmas, problems, things that are coming up with?
So, like we talked about today, the afternoon, is that, for example, in Breda, there's a national park. You have the Velde, the Velde, but we are working on Van Gogh National Park as a new national park where the city and nature is connected better. And what you see in other projects we are working on is that the landscape is so big that it is behind its border, so behind the city, behind the municipality. But this is a project on the scale of a province. So Van Gogh National Park, we're working with 50 organizations. So all the municipality, the province, Waterschap, also ASML, Eindhoven Airport. So all those big companies are working together. So Van Gogh National Park is an example of how we can approach forest and landscape because of this unique working together approach. And Breda is an example project. So they took the vision of Van Gogh National Park and asked us to make a plan for the city center. So we are making a design from Zundert, where Van Gogh has lived, till in the north of Breda. And Breda has a water problem, so when there's a heavy rainfall, the canals are full and the streets are underwater. So the municipality proposed this design where they make like this wetland, what divides the city in two, with a lot of mosquitoes again, same problem. But really, they will make a landscape in the city center, but it brings also a lot of new problems. So they asked us to rethink the ideas, and we proposed reusing the water system to make a green structure. So the canals here in Breda, we make a new bypass under the train track. Well, it's not only a bypass for the water solution, but also for the pedestrians. And we're making three stadsvrienden, typical Dutch landscape. What is a strong oriented to the church, symbol of the city. And on that way, we're combining the water problem with creating a new landscape. You have to imagine that this vrienden, this concept, it's like 100 meters wide. So it's not really a canal with only for recreation, for bridge, for boats, to do super, all kind of things, but it's really a landscape that can flood with water. So the willows are, of course, used as a type of tree which can grow in this climate. And so you see here where the water system, the trees, the inhabitants, so you can play in this landscape, are all combined in one plan. And of course, then you have the rest, the development fields as a next step for the developers. But we first make a framework where the water and the forest or the landscape is a central piece in our design. So combining all those elements, like we talked about, is I think one of the conclusions for today. Are you?
Yes, I think, and I'd like you raise a new point, which I think we didn't get onto, but that's it's time for a video. I think I think we mentioned in a couple of points is the development of the city and this idea of process and change. And I think Marie-Laure, you also had a project which you're going to show. We didn't have time to show, I don't think that, which was also an interesting one, showing this idea of starting with a landscape, which might be forest-based or hybrid forest-based, and then becoming occupied later, which is a kind of new strategy, a different kind of process. I'm going to look around the room. I'm very happy with the discussion we've just had. I think we had some, we've touched a lot of wicked problems. We've also touched some interesting avenues and angles. I'm really happy with the presentation that we've got from the different perspectives from our close neighbours, but different neighbours, and our further away neighbours, but actually closer by, because there's water and forest in a different way. So thank you both for that. I want to thank you, the four of you, for this close insight sort of into the sort of nitty-gritties of challenges and opportunities.